Hey folks, this is section 4.3. This is the second video that I'm doing in this section. The first video dealt with solving rational equations. We did two examples of that. What I'd like to focus on this video is down in the last page of your notes, how to set up a Pos Neg chart. I'm not going to teach you how to use this chart. I'll do that during class. I only want to teach you how to set it up in the first place. Notice that for question number 32, I have three different parts of this question, but all three of these parts have the same fraction, x plus 1 divided by x minus 4. So when you're setting up a Pos Neg chart, the first thing that you have to do is you have to take all of the factors on top. Now in this case, there's only one factor on top, and that's the factor x plus 1, and we're going to write it over here by our number line, x plus 1. And take all of the factors on bottom. Once again, there's only one of these, and we're going to continue our list here, x minus 4. Now, if you could pretend that each one of these factors is a mini equation, we've done that multiple times through the semester, x plus 1 equals 0, then I would be solving to get x equals negative 1. And I'm going to put negative 1 on my number line or on my x-axis. If you solved the mini equation x minus 4 equals 0, you would get an x equals 4. And so that's also going to go on my number line. Of course, 4 is to the right of negative 1. Now, what I'd like to point your attention to is that these two numbers split my number line into 5 sections. I have the section to the left of the negative 1. I have the section on top of the negative 1. I have the section between my negative 1 and 4. That's section number 3. Section number 4 is the section on top of the 4. And then section number 5 is the section to the right of the 4. All 5 of these sections are now on my number line. Only 2 of them, though, have a number to go with them. So what I'd like to do is take those 3 remaining sections, the one before, the one in the middle, and the one at the end, and give them a number. So if you could just pick a number, a random number on the left of negative 1, that would do just great. I'm going to choose the number negative 2. Now, maybe you would have chosen a negative 10 or a negative 1,000, and that would be just fine. All of those numbers are on the left of negative 1. I'm also going to choose a number in between the negative 1 and the 4. I like 0. I like plugging in 0, so I'm going to use 0. And then I also want to choose a number to the right of 4. I'll choose a 5. Choose anything you want to as long as it's to the right of 4. Now what I'm going to do is take each of these 5 numbers and plug them into my 2 factors. Now all I want you to come out with is either a positive, a negative, or the number 0. I don't want you coming out with any numbers, just a positive, a negative, or 0. So the first number that I'm going to plug in to x plus 1 is this negative 2. A negative 2 plus 1 is a negative number. So I'm just writing the negative there. It's either pos, neg, or 0 are my only 3 choices. If I take the next number, negative 1, and I plug that in, a negative 1 plus a 1 is 0. If I take the number 0 and plug it in, 0 plus 1 is a positive. If I take 4, 4 plus 1 is a positive. And 5 plus 1 is a positive. Now let's go do the exact same thing for the next factor. So take your negative 2, plug it into x minus 4. A negative 2 and a negative 4 gives me a negative number. The next one, negative 1. A negative 1 and a negative 4 also gives me a negative number. Plug in your 0. A 0 and a negative 4 gives me a negative number. Plug in your 4. A 4 and a negative 4 gives me 0. And last but not least, you have that positive 5. A positive 5 and a negative 4 gives you a positive number. Give yourself an equation bar underneath all these signs. And what we're going to do, notice that each of these 3 questions is asking me to divide my 2 factors, x plus 1 divide x minus 4. What we're going to do is we're going to take our signs and divide them. We're going to take a negative divided by a negative. We know that negative divided by negative is equal to a positive. Two negs make a pos. Next, we're going to take 0 divided by negative. 0 divided by negative. Well, anytime we have a 0 on top, that's totally okay. We just come out with 0. The next one, we have a positive divided by a negative. Positive divide negative is equal to a negative. Next one, now you got to be careful on this one, a positive divided by 0. Remember, you are not allowed to have 0 on bottom. We would call this undefined, or if we were graphing, we would call this an asymptote. And then the last pair, positive divided by positive, is going to be a positive. So the signs and symbols that we want to pay attention to are each of those that came out when we divided our column. That's how you set up a Pos Neg chart. Now quickly, let's go to number 40. I know this one's not in your notes, but I went ahead and added it just so that we could have practice setting up another Pos Neg chart. So remember, all the factors on top, well, there's only one, and that's a -2. And all the factors on bottom. You could say it's an x plus 3 and an x plus 3, but I'm just going to use my square and call it an x plus 3 quantity squared. The way we got our numbers for the number line is we set up a mini equation. Now, folks, if you set up a mini equation for -2, first of all, -2 does not equal 0. So I have no mini equation to solve for the top. But I do have a mini equation to solve for the bottom. And so what makes it 0? We know that -3 does. So the only number going on my number line is a -3. Now, of course, this does split it into 3 pieces. I've got the piece to the left, I've got the -3 itself, and I have the piece to the right. So I just need some numbers for the left and the right. So on the left, you might choose, I don't know, a -4, a -5. Any of those would be good. And over on the right, I like choosing 0. If I can choose 0, I'm going to choose 0. Now remember, the only signs you're going to put in are poses, negs, and zeros. So as I look at -2, it doesn't really matter what number I plug in for x. Since there's no x, -2 is always negative, no matter what. So at -5, it's negative. At -3, -2 is negative. At 0, -2 is negative. At 900, -2 is still negative. So -2 is always negative, no matter what. If I take, on the next factor, if I take my -5 and I plug it in right here, well, I know that a -5 plugged in for this x is going to give me a negative on the inside. But remember, you have to square this number. So a negative squared is going to turn into a positive. If you take a -3 and plug it in, you know that you have a -3 plus a 3, which is 0, and 0 squared is just 0. And lastly, if you take a 0 and plug it in for this, 0 plus 3 is a positive number. And if you take a positive number and square it, you're going to have a positive number. Get your equation bar. And now let's divide our top and our bottom. So first of all, we're going to divide a negative by a positive. Negative divided by positive is negative. The next one, we have negative divided by 0. A negative divided by 0, this is undefined or asymptote. And then lastly, we have a negative divided by a positive. So negative divided by positive is a negative. So the 3 signs or symbols that we want to pay attention to are those right there. Come back to class and we'll talk about how to actually read the Pos Neg chart and use it to answer these questions.